Hello everybody, how are you all doing? It's me, Joey.T.Cartoon.P. I came across an interesting article that I wanted to make a video about because I feel that it's interesting to say the least. I'll just put it out there. It's a very interesting topic to talk about. It's probably going to be something I'm going to talk about in an editorial in the near future, but for some reason this one caught my attention and I figure it's worth sharing. So I was online on comingsoon.net and I came across an article stating that one of the writers to Transformers Age of Extinction, Aaron Kruger, I think that's how you pronounce his first name, is going to be writing the script to a live-action CG hybrid of, wait for it, the 1940s classic Dumbo. Now, I would imagine there's a bunch of animation purists out there looking at that going, that's insane! That's just, what the heck? They're turning everything. World's going to hell in a basket. You've got the live-action Wonderland remake. You've got the live-action Sleeping Beauty Maleficent coming out. Why are they going to be taking a film like Dumbo, which for all intents and purposes, which is a very animated movie, and putting it into the live-action CG realm? Now, I went ahead and I started to think about that, mainly because I don't know if I've mentioned this on my show before, but Dumbo just so happens to be one of my favorite animated films of all time, for the sheer fact that it's one of the most influential films to have come out in, well, I'm not going to say it's a classic, so it came out in the 1940s. It's one of the most influential films to have come out ever. It established all the rules to the family film tropes. I mean, whereas I think they were touched upon in Pinocchio and Snow White, those are films that came out, but I still think Disney didn't perfect the Disney formula up to that point. I think that Dumbo was a film that did perfect all the tropes that would establish itself in other films. Like, you've got the believing in yourself moral that shows up in every film, in every animated film to say the least, with the magic feather thing. And you've got the elements that mix family elements, and you've also got elements that work for kids and work for adults. Like in the original Dumbo, there were references that go from the little engine that could, and also go from something as obscure as Nosferatu. Like, how the hell would you make a Nosferatu reference in a movie? I don't know. But Disney pulled it off with Dumbo. And I guess what I'm trying to go here is saying that I think Dumbo is one of the most influential animated films to have come out to establish all the rules of the genre that pretty much takes up the glut of animated films that come out in America. So it almost makes sense as to why they would want to remake it, because outside of the fact that it does establish all those rules, when the film came out, Dumbo was actually one of the most successful films. You would imagine all the films in the Golden Age to be big money makers, but as it turns out, outside of Snow White making a lot of money, it was actually harder for them to make as much money as that film. Pinocchio didn't make as much, Fantasia surprisingly didn't make as much, and neither did Bambi. But Dumbo was one of those films that, because I think it was more accessible to a mainstream audience, especially around that time, because I watched Dumbo and it's very much, I think a lot of critics have said this too, it's like a Silly Symphonies cartoons, like those 6-minute cartoons Disney was producing, made into a feature film. I at least think that was more accessible for a mainstream audience, more so than Pinocchio, which had some more darker elements in it, especially given the source material. It was a very dark origin thing going on, especially, and even Fantasia, which was supposed to appeal more to a more adult avant-garde crowd. So, to say the very least, Dumbo was a film that was, I guess, more profitable, and it only makes sense that right now, if Disney wants to continue on this trend of fairly successful films, they would want to take something from their catalog that is a big money maker. Because up to this point, they are penning a new live-action CG hybrid of the Jungle Book, which is also one of those big money makers that came out back in its day. And I guess the same would apply for Dumbo. Now the funny thing is that if you go into the history and whatnot, you actually realize that Dumbo has had a hard time trying to make a comeback. They've tried to make a musical version of Dumbo for Broadway, and I think in one of the DVD Blu-ray special features, they mentioned a Dumbo 2 direct-to-video sequel that, I don't know, I guess never really came to fruition. Maybe it did, but it's direct-to-video, so I wouldn't care. But either way, they've at least had plans to want to make another Dumbo movie, to say the least, or at least work off of it. So I would have to say that I think a Dumbo remake has potential for more. I don't want to be like most people to go on the bandwagon, because there is I have a lot of personal attachment to the film, and I think it's a terrible thing that they would want to succumb to a natural trend going on in Hollywood. But at the same time, I have to look at this and realize that there is potential for a good film in there. For starters, Dumbo, the film, is actually one of Disney's shortest films. I'm not kidding when I say it's an expanded Silly Symphony short, because the original Dumbo, actually, without the credits, is only an hour long. It's about 64 minutes, but if you take the credits out, it only comes out to about an hour, really. So I think there's a lot of potential if they want to expand on other characters in the film. Like, at one point in the film, I remember Timothy Mouse just showing up near the middle of the film, before the climax that leads to the rest of the film to continue. So maybe you could expand on Timothy, where he came from, which I think is interesting because I like Timothy Mouse as a character. But I also think you could also incorporate more humans too. I mean, if it is going to be a live-action film, you would probably want to include more live-action performances. Because in the original Dumbo, you only had the ringleader and the clowns, and I think the bullies that pick on Miss Jumbo. So I think you have more potential to incorporate maybe more about the ringleader who runs the circus, maybe more people who, other people who run the circus as well. But I think there's a possibility if they want to expand, because it's possible. They have expanded on short films and children's books. Truth be told, even the sheer fact that Dumbo, what most historians say is that the origin of the story Dumbo into film actually came from a Cracker Jack box. It was one of the story writers at Disney actually found the story on a Cracker Jack box and decided to make that into a feature film for their next project. So I would have to say that there's potential to expand on more things in the film Dumbo. Now, obviously, there's the big elephant, no pun intended, elephant in the room, which is that it's going to be a combination of live action and CG CG technology. Now, I think I covered this in one of my editorials, but I think the fact that Avatar is one of the biggest money makers to have come out, and it also serves as a good bridge between live action and animation, which is you can incorporate both of those elements, and it also proves to be a successful trend up to this point as well. More so than I think the trend of making everything 3D. It's more or less the idea of incorporating more animation and special effects into live action films. Like right now we're going to have Rise of the Planet of the Apes coming out. The Avengers was a big CG spectacle, and you could even argue that the fact that Transformers is a live-action CG hybrid, which, a little bit of foreshadowing here, I'm going to be talking about on the Cartoon Palooza soon. So, the sheer fact that it's a trend that started off with, blanking out all of a sudden, with Avatar, it only makes sense that they would continue this trend. Now, and again, it's the economic choice to take one of Disney's most successful films and make it into a live-action CG film to incorporate, you know, money plus money equals more money, you know. But either way, I'm also not too worried about the screenwriter, because this tends to happen a lot in animation and in live-action film, which is that you start off with one writer, he'll come up with a first draft, but then chances are he'll probably have another writer to be like, yo, Joe Schmo, come over here, maybe made another draft of the film. Who knows, the process for this film might take 2, 3, might take 4 years, and chances are they're probably going to incorporate more writers into it, and probably take a little bit of influence from the guy who wrote Transformers, and maybe have someone else who maybe genuinely really loves Dumbo. Because for all intents and purposes, I don't want to put a lot of doubt, because Dumbo is one of those very influential animated films. And I look at this, unlike most people, and they say that this is going to be just a complete disaster and it's going to be nothing more than something to compete with a traditional trend going on at Disney. But for me, I'm looking at this with enthusiasm. I think the fact that Dumbo is coming back will not only introduce a new audience to the original film, but I also think that there's a possibility to make Dumbo relevant again. Now, I'm not saying that this film is going to be any better than the original Dumbo film. I'm not going to say that this film might even be better than one of my favorite animated films of all time. I'm just saying that there's possibility and there's potential for it. And I, for one, am looking forward to this with some enthusiasm, unlike most people who are looking at this and just assuming it's going to be like one of many trends going on in Hollywood. But, you know, there's been some live-action CG films that at first seemed like dumb ideas. Like the original 101 Dalmatian films, while it's not perfect, I think worked pretty well. And you might even argue that Alice in Wonderland and Maleficent coming out are not generally great movies, but they're not worse than anything else. I actually, arguably, after seeing Maleficent, I would have to say that what they were starting off with originally, while Sleeping Beauty was one of the most stylish animated films to come out at Disney, it didn't have much story to it. I mean, Princess Aurora wasn't really an interesting character, and outside of Maleficent being one of the more interesting characters, it is kind of funny that they would take one of the more interesting characters from that film and make a film around her. And to me, it does just as much as what the original Sleeping Beauty did, which is, I would imagine, long comment section telling me about 100% wrong I am, but who knows, maybe it's something I'll talk about in a later episode, or even an editorial in the near future. But, long story short, a live-action Dumbo film, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? I think there's some potential for something to be good. Comment below! Let me know what you think. Tell me if I'm 100% wrong, or if this might work or not. Who knows? But that's something I just wanted to share my thoughts on, and I hope you all enjoy. Take care.